Good afternoon, fellow students, staff and faculty, fair judges. Here at Bethlehem, we pride ourselves in saying that there is no room for chronological snobbery. We are people of the great books who read in light of the greatest books, are we not? We recognize quite matter-of-factly that the greats of old should accompany us, the commoners of the present. In fact, if I may be so bold, we feel less common in their presence. And so, we summon Dutton and Eliot and Perpetua as the courageous role models to follow. We invoke Jonathan Edwards and Augustine to defend a side of a never-ending debate. Lewis and Aslan. In short, if there is anything close to chronological snobbery at this school, it is to shun the new and grasp the old. In with the old and out with the new, you modernist! I wonder, though, I do wonder whether our serious joy here has maybe lost the ability to smile. C.S. Lewis, in Meditations in the Toolshed, argues that there are two ways through which one experiences and interprets reality. There's looking at the sunbeam and there's looking along. Looking at merely refers to the material or scientific way by which one comes to describe and understand a specific aspect of reality. Looking at love, for instance, is to describe it as a chemical reaction in your brain by which your organism is attracted to another organism. Now, looking along refers to the experience that one feels when in love, the butterflies in the stomach, the googly eyes. No one way is better than the other intrinsically. The danger lies in choosing one as the only way. Accordingly, again, I wonder whether here at Bethlehem we run the risk of merely looking at the ivory pillars of our Christian tradition by immediately pointing to them and tipping them over, rather than looking along them by climbing to their lofty heights, not just to improve our own knowledge, but seeing them as the conduits towards the magnificent view of goodness, beauty, and truth. To prove my point, I could cite Aristotle's notion of eudaimonia, where happiness or joy or human flourishing is man's end. Or perhaps our Augustinian or Thomist friends may show us how Augustine or Thomas Aquinas prove this. We've all done this. I've called my disoriented classmates to go read Aquinas on the topic of, you name it, lying. It's rather ironic, really. I'm arguing not to merely look at the pillars, and even right now, I'm using C.S. Lewis to make my case. I hope, however, that even in this tension, we will succeed in not merely looking at Lewis's life, but also looking along the beam of his experience and arguments. So, in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, he relates that one of the contributing factors for his conversion was the absolute joy that he found in reading some of the great writers of the past. The only problem, he used to say, was that they were mostly religious, especially Christian. George MacDonald, John Milton, George Herbert, and others. He simply worded his annoyance with an alteration of a quote from the Song of Roland. Christians are wrong, but all the rest are bores. So even in this season of his atheistic life, Lewis is reading along, not merely looking at. His reading along the ancient pages of these pillars sparked what would later become his fiery Christianity. Now granted, we could say Lewis was a nerd that loved all those nerdy things in which nerds find their joy. Poetry, literature, philosophy, for goodness sake, history. Unfortunately, though, for those who raise such an objection, I fear that you have either described yourselves in the process, or perhaps you have described a good many of the people present here tonight. Yet regardless of where one's joy materializes individually, maybe music or cooking or whatever it is, we still ought to recognize that merely looking at the pillars generally results in mediocrity and conceit, which we must emphatically oppose. In fact, the infamous Screwtape once proposed a toast at a demonic banquet. Within the fiery depths of hell, he said, "What I want to fix your attention on is the vast overall movement towards the discrediting and finally the elimination of every kind of human excellence, moral, cultural, or intellectual." This movement, which Screwtape was referring to, was essentially mediocrity. It was sameness, his hellish goal. Though he's specifically talking about human tendency towards being like everyone else, I don't think it's a stretch to include our own tendency to focus our attention on the ancients, reiterating and parroting their alien verbiage without truly tasting the nectar whence those words originally emerged. In our haste to quote the greats, we run the risk of losing our own voices. We run the risk of stagnating the juices of our creativity. And yes, most of us are quick to talk, especially as snobbish undergraduate BCS students like myself. I recognize that. But how much of what we talk, how much of what we say is us, what we've tasted? And not some great preacher or theologian or philosopher whom we take out of our pockets? There inevitably exists a new call for true originality, where the call to originality has been so distorted as to mean self-expression, heedless of any objective goodness, beauty, and truth. Originality, as Lewis defines it, is to try to tell the truth without caring twopence how often it has been told before. This does not mean chronological snobbery or Rousseauian or existential originality. It means informing our minds and then trying to tell the truth accordingly. It means climbing the ancient pillars and from their lofty heights proclaim with our own voice the truth we've discovered and tasted alongside the greats of antiquity. Anything less than that runs the risk of becoming the object of Lady Philosophy's disdain, as Boethius recorded. She said that those who with violent hands strove to seize me, carrying me off, protesting and struggling as if I were part of the booty, tearing my dress, which I wove with my own hands, and then went off with their torn off shreds, thinking they possessed all of me. And because they seemed to be wearing certain bits of my dress, some were ignorantly accepted as my servants and were abused by the delusions of the uneducated mob. In other words, were we to neglect looking along the beams of old due to merely focusing on looking at them may render us conceited, snobbish, high-browed, and ultimately useless sophists. As Lewis put it, we come to love our knowledge more than the thing known, and to delight not in the exercise of our talents, but in the fact that they are ours. Instead, Lewis called the scholars of his time, and I now attempt to remind us of the ancient axiom, ars gratia artis. That is, quote, to the pursuit of knowledge and beauty for their own sake, but in a sense which does not exclude their being for God's sake. We can therefore pursue knowledge as such and beauty as such in the sure confidence that by so doing, we are either advancing the vision of God ourselves or indirectly helping others to do so. So sure, an abstract syllogism may not strike some of our aesthetic sensibilities. But if one can't find the beauty in it, look beyond it to what it represents. The goodness of the created order, the objective truth of conforming to reality, the beauty of it all, since ultimately, even the pillars themselves are grounded on God. So finally, looking along Lewis's life and arguments, I hope we can recognize and understand that the pillars of old are the capstones on which we stand, who raise us to excellence, whence we proclaim goodness and truth by showing their beauty to later generations. These capstones themselves recognized and proclaimed the beauty on which they stood, the divine voice whose harmony calls our own voices. So let us even now humbly raise our undergraduate toddler babblings, not losing them among the great voices of old, but tasting and seeing for ourselves the beauty and goodness to which these point and whence they rise, that is, the one voice, the Logos. Does not God himself say, let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech? How else will we take the baton which the ancients raised for our grasp? How else will we pass it on to our students, to our friends, our children? If not, by glorifying God with our own voices and thoughts, as meager and immature as we presently find them. So hearken to this soliloquy of my own struggles, friends. Let us stand alongside the giants on the shoulders of God, humbly but zealously proclaiming his truth, his goodness, his beauty. Thank you.